the first topic is, should MMOs ever end?
Right, and this is in keeping with the impending release of, and those who play MMO should know, Endwalker for Final Fantasy XIV. The reason that we're bringing this up is because Endwalker is the end of a large major story arc, the Zodiac story arc.
Yep.
And it is being
highly anticipated. Highly
anticipated. In fact, a number of our friends who play FF14, including HawkZombie, have been rushing to get ready for this thing, this expansion.
It's a big deal, yeah.
Now, the thing is this. The people who created Final Fantasy XIV, Square Enix, have stated that this is not going to be the end of Final Fantasy XIV. It's just the end of this particular story arc.
Yeah.
And that there'll be more content afterwards. And yeah, like 404, right? Dude is in early access queue right now.
It is.
Which, funny note, of course, early access queues are extremely long. People have been having bugs. Stuff has been breaking right and left because it's early access. Because, of course, that's how it goes.
That's how early access is.
But this is a highly anticipated and has been talked about for a very long time. Ever since they announced Endwalker, fans of Final Fantasy XIV and people who were getting into the property have been pretty much talking about this nonstop.
Yeah.
And it brings up a very interesting question. Should an MMO end? Should there be an actual point where the MMO's main story comes to an end, the problems are forever resolved, and any content you do afterwards is just, helping other people get to that ending, or you quit and go to another MMO.
Right.
So, I mean, we're going to analyze that because we're not MMO players, but we are friends with a ton of MMO players, and we have played one MMO.
Yes, we have.
Extensively. And that's Elder Scrolls Online.
Elder Scrolls Online.
Yes. So let's start with just some thoughts, and we want to hear from you in chat as well. Burke brings up a good point.
Yeah. An MMO that does outlive its lore. Yes.
Right. Wow. WoW kept going and kept going. It reached a conclusion to one of its stories, and it kept going and it kept going.
Yes,
and,
it did.
WoW has kind of slid as being the biggest MMO, even though it has the most players. A lot of people who are playing it nowadays are, they're playing it because they're loyal. They're loyal to it. Anyway, the thing that I want to bring up is this, and this is the reason why I personally am not an MMO player. I don't like playing games that don't have a feeling of conclusion. I like to feel like there's a part where it's done. And when I've watched my friends like Fox and 404 and others play Final Fantasy XIV, I see them go through a story arc. I see this big epic thing. The music sounds like a final boss and it looks like a final boss. But then afterwards, there's entirely more stuff. For an MMO player, that sounds about what they'd want. But is there a point where the developers go, we can't throw anything else at you? So what do you think, Teal?
I think that WoW is a good example. You get to a point where you've pretty much done everything you can in that particular game.
Yeah.
And you need to end it. Let's switch gears for a second and get away from games, and let's go to a television series.
Okay.
There's a point where you just you end it. Like, you have 3-4 seasons. You tell your story. You fleshed out your characters completely, and anything more is just going to be diminishment. When you have nothing else to add to the story of that world and the characters, you're done. End it. Move on.
So, like, for example, Supernatural. Supernatural is a series that kept going and kept going and kept going.
Yeah.
And every time you think they'd come to some kind of an end, they'd find a way to escalate or increase or stuff like that.
A good example, and this is in the comics world, of a story that reached a satisfying conclusion and the guy is not putting out anymore, is Neil Gaiman's Sandman.
There you go.
It had it had a good story run, and it had several arcs, and then he ended it.
Right.
And it's so that's an example. We gave you 2 examples of one that should have ended and didn't, and another one that did end.
Yeah. Very good examples. Very good examples. By the way, if there are MMO players in the chat, please tell us your thoughts on this. We want to hear from people who delve into MMOs on a regular basis, what they feel. Because what I am seeing right now are a lot of our single player people.
Right.
You know, KV, for example, says he prefers SSOs, small single player offline games. Cute.
Yeah. Burke is mainly a lore player, so they get frustrated with stories that they think are growing, but the stories actually repeat themselves.
Yeah, that is actually a big thing.
And he uses a WoW example.
Yeah, Garrosh and Sylvanas. Another thing that people have said against WoW, and I'm not disrespecting WoW, it has its place. It's definitely a historic landmark.
Oh, yeah.
In MMOs.
They broke ground on this.
They did. But nowadays, it's, and Fox was talking about this, that every villain has a redemption. You know, they're not really bad guys. Which it's fine to have a sympathetic villain. It's fine to have villains that aren't necessarily evil. They're doing it for whatever reason. But after a while, I mean, come on, don't you just want to smack a bad guy for being a bad guy?
Yeah.
You know? So it's like...
If it's the same old thing over and over again, how boring is that?
Right.
You know, you got nowhere else to go, so end it, please.
Right. BG says he personally likes games that have a definitive endpoint. Burke, of course, mentioned the lore player.
Right.
But Burke also mentioned the point above. You start retconning, adding bloat, going full DPC power creep.
You're right. Yes.
And that's the thing is, even if you have the best possible roadmap for an MMORPG, is it a guarantee that at some point you're not going to be able to expand anymore? Where you're not going to be able to go any higher. You're not going to be able to raise the cap anymore or raise the gear cap anymore without you doing damage that, you know, final bosses would do. You know, that kind of thing. Is there a point where you become the final boss? Now, that would be interesting.
That would actually be very interesting.
I would be interested in playing an MMO where at a certain point you grow so powerful you're the bad guy. That would be kind of neat. You know?
But I have seen the examples of the retconning. That actually happened in Elder Scrolls. Right.
Now, we're not going to talk about the incredibly genius thing that Final Fantasy A Realm Reborn did. FF14 had a ton of technical issues, and it failed. So what they did was they nuked the world.
Yeah.
And then the Realm Reborn was the result of that nukage. In that case, the reinventing of themselves due to technical issues was ingenious. And in that case, Final Fantasy XIV gets a pass on that, and a pass with a gold trophy. They deserve it.
Yeah.
However, how many times can you do that before it becomes, okay, every time we reach the end of the story, we're going to nuke the world?
Oh, yeah. You know, this isn't Sheogorath, okay? You don't get the Grey March every 1,000 years. Yeah.
All right. So what does Moogle say?
Well, Moogle says that WoW lost them because of repeated gameplay missteps. Every expansion after a certain one, they got worse in terms of the mechanics. You had classes and specializations that got really wonky. The metagame was just messy and probably disjointed, and progression was clunkier. Yeah. You know, WoW is they're not the only ones, but WoW is what we're all thinking about right now.
Yeah.
With an MMO that has just lost its way and needed to have ended.
Right. And Dude says, well, having played both FF14 and WoW, the main difference between the two lore-wise, Blizzard writes themselves into this is the ultimate authority in the universe, the biggest, baddest evil. Ha 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 ha. Hey,
just kidding. There's a bigger bad guy.
While FF14's current big bad is recurring, he's been around story arcs, pops up and makes sense. Story, not defeated, he just has a setback. Which is fine. But at what point, which is fine. So FF14's main antagonist is recurring. He never gets defeated. He's just set back. Again, that's okay. I mean, that was a good way, not FF14, Xenosaga Episode 1, you didn't actually fight Elbate. You kind of slapped Albedo around.
A little bit,
but then he throws the final boss at you to get away.
Right.
So, but the fact of the matter is in FF14's thing where the main villain keeps having setbacks, he doesn't actually get defeated. Well, at what point do you need to say, okay, we need to fight the big bad? Because I, as a player, I mean, I can't speak for every MMO player out there. I can't speak for every player, but I would get really frustrated if time after time the big bad guy got away or got set back. You know, and I wasn't able to destroy him or seal him away or somehow make it so that he couldn't be the big bad guy.
Yeah, you know, he's done, he's gone.
Right. There's, you know, and then at that point, okay, do you end the story or do you introduce another bad guy, a bigger, badder guy? You know, one of the successful parts of the Ultima series early on was that, like, the first game you fight against an evil dark wizard who is trying to do a bad thing. And then the second game, you fight against his apprentice who has risen to power. You're a different hero. You're a different hero. In the first game, you play Lord British, and in the second game, you play a hero that Lord British has summoned. And in the third game, Exodus, it's the result of the evil wizard and his apprentice's magic.
Right.
So at least those first 3 Ultima games, they built upon each other. Well, why not have an MMO do that? You know. Anyway, let's catch up with chat a little bit here.
Well, people are explaining, okay, for RuneScape, okay, Burke points out that it's still surviving, but it's not centered around its lore.
Right. It sounds interesting. It sounds more like RuneScape is just about gameplay.
Yeah.
Instead of story.
So maybe that's the key, because these other things that everybody's having a problem with, it's the story. They focus on the RPG, the story part of it, and stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
They really do.
That's how stories are.
They do. And Zuma, welcome to the stream, Zuma, my man. FF14's strength is that it's a Final Fantasy game. That is true.
That's very true.
It has got very good writing. It has got good progression. It is a solid game. But because it's a Final Fantasy game, it has its popularity. It has that massive amount of lore to build off of.
Oh, absolutely.
So, you know, that's why it's so popular.
Moogle Rampage points out that basically MMOs are a time sink.
They are.
And that's very true. You know, after a while, you've got to move on and do other stuff.
Right. I like his comment that MMOs are also a second job.
Yes.
That's true.
That is true.
That's true. Moogle has a full-time gig plus game dev. You know, same here. You know, we have full-time jobs. Teal has one. I have another. Then we do the channel. So yeah, we can't commit to an MMO.
Absolutely cannot commit to one. So yeah.
And yes, BG, I hate it when the bad guys get away all the time too. It's very annoying.
All the freaking time. It's annoying. It's like, well, why am I doing this? What I'm doing does not matter.
Right.
Because this guy's just going to come back. So why should I even bother?
Right. Boo Boo Hotep actually brings up the very thing that made me realize why I dislike MMOs so much.
Okay.
So in Final if you have not finished the Nier Automata crossover for Final Fantasy XIV, I'm going to spoil some of it. So you might want to mute yourself for a second.
Yeah, mute.
All right. I'll shake my head when I'm done. So in the Nier Automata crossover, about halfway through, you go through the copied factory, and the boss is 9S. It's 9s. And the music is fantastic. It sounds like an end music boss. It sounds like you're fighting the culmination of 9S's story. And the boss is really good. It's well put together. It's very strong. And then as you continue the rest of the Nier Automata story and finally connect with 2B, who helps you repair 9, and you come to the end of that story, it feels like it is this powerful ending to a self-contained story arc.
Yes.
That gives a compliment to how Nier Automata actually ends. So, almost like the ending to Nier Automata, one of the endings, leads into the crossover, and then gives that an elegant ending. When I looked at that, and then I looked at the rest of Final Fantasy XIV, based off of what Fox and Dude tell me, I realized that I liked the way the Nier Automata crossover happened. It was a self-contained story that had a definitive beginning and a definitive end. Unlike the rest of 14, which just keeps going.
Yeah.
You know, you fight a big bad, and then there's a bigger bad, or, oh, that wasn't really the big bad, there's another big bad, or the big bad got away, etc., etc., etc. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I don't like something that keeps going and going and going and never gives me the feeling of an ending. Okay, I'm done talking about the spoilers. Anyway. So, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so Wolf says, exactly. Who needs a video game to turn into a monthly bill?
Well, that's true.
Another thing.
That's another consideration is the cost.
Right, the cost. And I see that Dude and Zoomer are talking about some boss in Final Fantasy 14. Sorry. Don't know enough. I just know what I've watched my friends play. So yeah, I think what we can all kind of say that everyone on chat agrees with is that MMOs are a monetary and time sink, and I think the players are getting into that, know they're getting into that. And at this point in time, yes. Yeah.
You should know that because it is broadcast out there in all media platforms. Right. This is what an MMO is.
Right.
This is what it does.